There are times when you're working in a spreadsheet that things don't quite work, or you generate errors but you're not quite sure where the error is coming from. One thing we can do to try and trace an error is use the tracer arrows. Now there are two types of arrows. There are arrows that are called dependents, as we see here in our sales 2013 file, dependents, and there are those that are called precedents. A dependent arrow tells you from a particular cell in question, so this one here in B2, tells you which other cells are dependent on the value of this cell. So we start off with a little dot, we follow the arrow to the other end, and where the arrowhead is the cell that is dependent on the cell we've chosen. So B2, for example, has E2 dependent on it, and that's because it's summing all of these cells, and B2 is one of those cells. It also has B6 dependent upon it, because we start with a dot and we go to an arrow. Because this cell here is summing that column, therefore the cell B2 feeds into it. Now there is also a dotted line with an arrow that points to a sheet image. That's because a cell in another sheet is dependent on this particular cell. And if we wanted to know what cell that was, we need to make sure our cursor is just there at the arrow tip, and click, brings up the Go To dialog box and effectively tells us where we're going, which is the current workbook, 2013 total, which is that sheet there, B2. Now we can say OK and we'll be taken there, so we can see where that cell is, or for the moment we'll just click cancel. So all the arrows on this particular sheet, the dependent sheet, are all dependents. So a dot, then with an arrow, takes you to the cell that is dependent on the cell you start with. So again, this one here, F2, has I2 dependent on it and F6 dependent on it. Choosing the Q1 total here in E13, the only thing dependent on it is the grand total for the H1 over here in J13. So the dependent trace arrows allow you to trace the cells that are dependent on the cell you're looking at. Precedent arrows show you the cells that feed in to a given cell. So here we're selecting C6 and we say show me its precedents, and it shows all of these cells here. There's a little box around them, so effectively this range of cells feeds in to there, which from the formula we can see it does. The same here, J6 501, we want to know its precedents. Well, it's the ones with the dot on this arrow, so it's not the whole arrow, it's the ones with the dots. It's that cell there and that cell there. Whereas here the dot starts at the beginning of the range and then there's a box to denote the range. Same with this little one here. Q1 for the east, if we were to click there and ask for the precedents, it tells us these cells here. So there's a dot in the first and then a rectangular in blue around the range. Whereas over here, the H1 total for pairs says the precedents are that cell and that cell. So you can trace both cells that are dependent on a given cell and cells that feed in to a given cell. Now we have a grand total here, which amalgamates the other two sheets. And again, we've got a mixture here of precedents and dependent arrows. One slight improvement possibly that you would want to give to Microsoft is to colour the two sets of arrows different colours. But having said that, it's fairly straightforward to follow. This cell here has as dependents that one and that one, plus it has a link from another sheet, but that link is coming this way, so it's saying there's another cell in another sheet that is a precedent to this cell. And just like before, you need to get your cursor in just the right place. Bring that up and you can see there are two other cells that feed in to this cell, and they're in the precedents and the dependents sheets. If I wanted to see one, I could click on OK and it would take me to it. So that's that one there. Within the sheet itself, this cell here, E6, it has as precedents this range of cells here, because the dot starts there and the arrow points down here. But then as dependents, it's only this cell over here that depends on it. So there's a single dot with an arrow all the way to J6. So those are the two types of arrow, precedents and dependents, and we'll look at how we can add those ourselves and how useful they can be to troubleshooting as we move forwards.